Satoru Gojo, born in the Gojo clan, is a Jujutsu Kaisen character created by Gege Akutami, a mix of Naruto and Demon Slayer, to summarize. The Gojo family is one of the three most powerful and richest families in the Jujutsu world, and Satoru, specifically, is the first in 400 years to inherit two super special techniques called Limitless, which gives him powers over space and physics, and the Six Eyes, which allows him to see things even with his eyes closed, apparently. During his youth at the Tokyo Jujutsu School in Japan, he formed a partnership with Suguru Geto, who eventually became jealous of him, and then he died. A few years later, Gojo becomes a teacher at the same school and begins training new wizards like Harry Potter, Hermione, and Sasuke Uchiha from Final Fantasy XV. Since he was a very strong character and the fans liked him a lot, the author, Gege Akutami, eventually ends up sending Gojo to hell after resurrecting his friend Geto, who traps Gojo in a kind of a Pokeball until he needs to come back wearing Goku's pants from Dragon Ball Z and beat up the nine-tailed fox or something like that. I don't know, I haven't seen that anime. From the moment he first appears, it's clear how unique Satoru Gojo's personality is. He always comes across as somewhat childish and silly, yet at the same time he always manages to be quite serious and competent when the situation calls for it. It's quite clear that he doesn't follow conventional logic, both in his battles and in real life, in his interactions with other characters, especially those authorities of the Jujutsu Kaisen school, for example. Ironically, it's as if he sees paths no one else sees and acts with complete confidence and certainty on that, even when things aren't visible to everyone. Perhaps even one of the metaphors or symbolisms for him being blindfolded throughout the anime. After all, this is a very common archetype in Jungian and analytical psychology, for example. In Greek mythology, Tiresias is a blind prophet from the city of Thebes, who ends up becoming blind after touching two serpents, or, in other versions, after having revealed the secret of the gods. But in compensation for his physical loss, he ends up gaining intuitive and even divine powers, such as clairvoyance, the ability to predict the future without depending on the world of sensations to do so. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, Bartimaeus is a blind man who is eventually healed by Jesus Christ. In some texts, he is also represented as a kind of seer, demonstrating how this physical blindness can be a path to heightened perception, and in the stories, spiritual insight even. This interpretation is also seen in Eastern traditions such as the Zen Buddhism, which values the ability to see or even to look not as visual things per se, but rather as more introspective insights that even reveal the essence of being, that which transcends, The symbolism ends up being quite obvious in Gojo's character when we see him fighting against Jogo, a fight in which he always ends up joking and provoking, but at the same time, each move he makes ends up always being calculated to exploit the flaws, to discover new information about who was behind the attack that Jogo had made, and of course, to teach some new things to his student, Itadori, who is also there in that place. In other words, at the same time that he uses the world around him as a kind of playground, seeing all these possibilities that for most people are not so clear, he also maintains a type of control, mainly because he is not only extremely powerful, but mainly because he understands very well the technique and the skills that he himself possesses. In the same fight, he ends up explaining to Itadori how some of his powers work, like his infinity technique that ends up being able to bend space and time or something like that, but also in several other scenes in which he uses his ability. It is very clear that even with this playful attitude, Gojo is always focused and confident in his abilities, mainly because he knows how to use them masterfully. Plus, when we see him interacting with his students, we see that Gojo is very idealistic. He dreams of a world in which his students, even though in the present moment seem like very weak and not very competent, well, at least not as much as they can become, at least in Gojo's perspective, Gojo, still believes in them. He still has this tendency to create something new, or at least this desire to create something new from ground up, detached from everything that came before. And he sees that not based on values and emotions and feelings per se, but in a very critical analysis, a very personal opinion that he holds regarding to the world and the structure he's in. Almost like a Socrates, I would say. Given this analysis, I would suggest that both extroverted intuition and introverted thinking are very strong traits in this character, while NE is a function that allows a person to see various possibilities that often others cannot see, making it seem random or disconnected from reality or even its past. TI ends up providing a funnel for these seeing possibilities. More specifically, it is the ability to create strategies in internal logical connections according to the reality that is being perceived and received by NE. The psychological types that tend to use these functions are types like INTPs. But here, in the case of Gojo, it seems to be more connected with ENTPs, because while INTPs first use TI logic to then expand this logic to several other possible applications of reality, that is NE, Gojo seems to see first these possibilities and only then explore and analyze them properly. Something we see constantly, especially in season 2 after he's killed by Toji, or even in the fight that takes place in Shibuya subway. He doesn't try to analyze the situation first as an INTP will do, especially those with Enneagram 5. He seems to do things first and then figure out a way out of the situation later. In other words, first the possibilities and then a response, then a logical thought and about what's happening around him. That is TI. And that's it. That was the analysis of this character. If you liked it, leave a like, write in the comments what other characters you would like to see, share the video with your friends, and if you're interested in receiving a personality analysis or learning more about this, you can click the link in the description and schedule a session with me, or buy the book where I explain a little more about those theories. My name is Julio Caesar, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.